I'm Caroline Mason, 23 years old, and on the morning of my college graduation, I stood alone at the corner of Maple and Ridgeway waiting for the 7:10 bus into town. I wore the gown I'd pressed flat the night before, the same one I'd seen classmates wear in proud family photos. My cap sat straight, my tassels still the flowers I held. I bought myself white roses tied with a thin purple ribbon. They looked fragile in the morning light, but not as fragile as I felt when I checked my phone and read the message from my father again. Before I go any further, let me know where you're listening from in the comments, and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever had to keep walking, even when no one showed up for you. I grew up about 35 minutes outside Columbus, Ohio, in a town so small most folks didn't bother locking their doors, the kind of place where everybody knew who taught what at the high school and which kid belonged to, which family. People said it was a good place to raise children, and maybe for some, it was my parents. Mark and Judy Mason lived in the same white 2-story house they'd bought before I was born. Dad worked for a heating and cooling company, fixing systems all over the county. Mom kept books and ran the front desk at Dr. Hill's dental clinic. They didn't make much, but they believed in saving what they had and spending carefully on what mattered to them. Our house was always tidy, especially the front yard. Dad mowed every Saturday, rain or shine. My room was painted soft gray with an old bookshelf and a narrow desk pushed under the window. Across the hall was my younger sister Megan's room, pink with glittery curtains and fairy lights. Her bed looked like it came from a princess catalog, and her closet was always full of new clothes. From as early as I can remember, Megan was the one they called Sunshine, the one who lit up a room. Her birthdays were loud, full of balloons and streamers and themes that changed each year. When she turned 9, there was a magician and a pony and a cake, shaped like Cinderella's carriage. Mine were quiet dinners, just the 4 of us, sometimes 5. If Grandma stopped by, always the same chocolate cake from the grocery store and a paper card with my name spelled right, but never quite centered. When I started bringing home certificates and awards for school, they smiled, said good job, and then asked me to set the table. Megan didn't like school, and that seemed to matter more than whether I liked it or not. I remember the day I won first place in a statewide science competition, and all Dad said was, "Don't forget to feed the dog." Mom asked me to help Megan finish her history project that night. There were other moments that stuck with me too, like the time Mom caught me reading a book on personal finance during a cookout and laughed, "Lighten up, honey, you're too serious," or the time Dad told a neighbor at a family reunion that Megan was the one with real personality and that. I mostly just kept things running. I didn't argue. I just kept studying, worked part-time at the diner downtown. From the age of 15, saved my tips and read every book I could find on how to build something better. I didn't dream big. I just wanted something else, something that didn't make me feel like a spare part in my own life. My high school math teacher, Mr. Raymond, once told me after class, "Caroline, you don't belong here, and that's the best news you'll ever get." I didn't know what he meant then, but I held on to those words tighter than anything else. When I started applying to colleges, I didn't tell anyone. I used the old family laptop late at night while Megan played music down the hall, and Mom watched baking shows with the volume up. I didn't think anyone would understand why it mattered so much to me to go somewhere far away, and when the acceptance letter came from Indiana University with a scholarship offer and a real path forward, I thought maybe, just maybe, they'd be proud of me too. The night I told my parents about Indiana University was the same night Megan hit 500,000 views on a dance video. Mom had made her garlic chicken with mashed potatoes, the kind she only pulled out when something was worth celebrating. I waited until everyone was seated, until Megan had already passed her phone around the table twice. Then I slid the paper across the table, the letter printed and folded with care. My heart beat so loud I could barely hear my own voice when I said it. I got in. Indiana University. They offered me a partial scholarship. The room went still for a moment. Megan looked confused, like I had interrupted a show she was enjoying. Mom put down her fork and picked up the letter, her eyebrows drawing together as she read. Dad didn't even reach for it. He just leaned back in his chair and let out a quiet, flat laugh. Indiana. That's out of state. You think you're better than us now? I said nothing. I knew better. I looked down at my plate, then back at Mom. She was still staring at the letter, her mouth pressed tight. She folded it slowly, set it beside her glass, and sighed. If you go, who's going to help with groceries and rides and all the cleaning? What about Megan's college stuff next year? You don't think about anyone but yourself. Megan rolled her eyes. Yeah, great, so she gets a scholarship and suddenly we're all supposed to drop everything. She's still going to end up working at some boring office anyway. I didn't respond. There was no point. I reached across the table and picked the letter back up. I didn't want it stained with chicken grease. I left the room without finishing my dinner. That was the last time I brought anything home to celebrate. I moved to Bloomington in August. The bus ride from Columbus took a little over 4 hours. I arrived with one duffel bag and a second-hand suitcase I'd bought with tip money. The dorm was small, 2 beds, 2 desks, a shared dresser. My roommate Leah was studying graphic design. We met our neighbor Jared in the hallway pre-med, always carrying flashcards and protein bars. The 3 of us stuck close that first semester, sharing groceries, sitting through long lectures, swapping shifts when one of us got sick. I found a job at Pop's Sandwiches on 10th and Walnut. Nights and weekends, mostly wrapping subs and wiping counters until closing. I also picked up hours at the campus library. They paid me to reshelve books and keep the quiet zones tidy. It wasn't much, but it helped with what the scholarship didn't cover. I didn't tell my parents about the jobs. They didn't ask. The first few weeks were hard. I got used to falling asleep at my desk, waking up with a stiff neck and a half-written paper. Some nights I barely had enough money for the vending machine, but I kept going. Morning classes, sandwich shifts, library shifts, group projects, lectures, exams. And when my phone lit up, it was usually a text from Mom. Caroline, can you check prices for that water heater again? Ours is still leaking. Can you send something for Megan's books this semester? She's short. Dad says the car's acting up. Any chance you could help out? Not once did they ask how I was doing. Not once did they ask if I had eaten that day, or how the exams were going, or if I had made any friends. My voice, when I did answer, stayed calm. I didn't expect much, so I couldn't be disappointed. I just sent the links or replied with what I could afford. One afternoon, I was shelving a row of economics journals when Professor Wallace stopped beside me. She asked about a paper I'd submitted the week before, said she'd been impressed, asked if I might want to join a research group that focused on financial literacy for low-income students. I didn't know what to say at first. No one had ever looked at me like that, not at home, not in high school, like I had something worth offering. She handed me a flyer and told me to stop by her office. I did. 2 weeks later, I submitted a proposal for a mobile budgeting app, something simple that tracked spending, set savings goals, and offered reminders for bills. I didn't expect much, but one rainy Thursday, I got the email. The University Startup Fund had approved it. I sat at the edge of my bed, staring at the screen, the raindrops tapping against the window like a soft drum. I didn't cry, not at first, but when Leah came in and saw me sitting there with the laptop open, she asked what was wrong. I showed her the message. She hugged me so tight I couldn't breathe. That night, we walked 3 blocks in the rain and split a pizza and 2 sodas from the corner place with sticky floors and loud music. Jared joined us halfway through. He raised his cup and said, "To Caroline, the only person I know who can change her whole life with a spreadsheet." I didn't tell my parents. I knew they wouldn't understand. My final year, Green Ridge Capital offered me a paid internship. They specialized in sustainable investments and financial programs for underserved communities. It was in Austin, Texas. It meant moving halfway across the country for the summer. When I got the offer, I accepted within the hour. Leah hugged me. Jared fist-bumped me and offered to help with boxes. I texted home out of courtesy. The reply came 2 days later. "Can you send money for the electric bill?" I stood at the kitchen window in our off-campus apartment and stared out at the empty street. I typed the answer slowly. "Not this time. I'm moving to Austin for work." No reply came back. That was fine. I had already started packing. But when graduation came around, I decided to invite them anyway. And that decision, that small flicker of hope, is what changed everything that came next. Because sometimes it isn't what they say, it's what they don't, and what they choose instead. I got back to Ohio 2 days before graduation. It was the first time I'd been home in nearly 4 years. I stepped off the bus with my suitcase in one hand and a white envelope tucked carefully inside my bag. I'd chosen it weeks ago, plain, but elegant, just like the ones the university had sent out for the formal invites. I had tucked the map inside along with the full schedule and reservation confirmation for the dinner after the ceremony. I'd even printed directions from the hotel to the auditorium just in case. When I walked through the front door, Dad smiled and said, "Well, look who's home." Mom hugged me lightly and said the house felt quieter without me. I wasn't sure if that was good or bad. Megan was on the couch, one leg curled under her, flipping through something on her phone. She gave me a little wave without looking up. I pulled the envelope from my bag and held it out. "Everything you need is in here. The hotel's already booked. There's a table reserved after the ceremony. You don't have to worry about anything." Dad took it and gave a small nod. "Of course. Wouldn't miss it." I stood there for a second, watching his expression, trying to find something solid in it. Then I looked at Mom. She smiled thin and polite. "That's thoughtful of you, Caroline." I turned toward Megan and asked if she was coming too. She didn't look up. "Do we really have to sit through the whole thing? It's like 2 hours, right?" I didn't answer. I just said it starts at 10 and went upstairs. That night, I stayed up late repacking my things, even though everything was already folded and set. I imagined the moment I'd walk across the stage, the rows of people watching, maybe catching a glimpse of my parents in the crowd. I had pictured it more times than I could count, not grand or loud, just one moment where someone waved or smiled when my name was called. I went to sleep with that picture in my head, steady and quiet. I came down early the next morning, already dressed, the gown smooth and neat, the tassel clipped in place. I'd braided my hair the night before so it would stay in place under the cap. The house was quiet, but I could hear faint voices coming from the kitchen. When I stepped in, they were already sitting at the table. Coffee cups, toast, the usual things. Mom looked up first. She opened her mouth, closed it, then said, "Sweetheart, something's come up." My hands tightened around the bouquet I was carrying, white roses I'd bought myself from a little shop in town. Dad spoke before she could finish. "The dealership called. They're delivering the car this morning. They bumped the time up and we can't reschedule." I didn't move. "The car?" I asked. Megan's voice cut in from the far end of the table. "The Tesla. It's coming early. You won't make this harder, right, Caroline?" She was smiling. It wasn't mean, not exactly, just excited. I looked back at Dad. "You said you'd be there." Mom stood and walked around the table, placing a hand gently on my arm. "You've always managed things on your own. You'll be fine taking the Greyhound, won't you?" I didn't answer. I just nodded once and turned toward the front door. The walk to the bus stop was 15 minutes. I took the long way, cutting past the park and down a quieter street. My shoes clicked softly on the pavement. I held the bouquet in one hand and kept the other tucked close to my side. The sunlight had that early morning color, soft and pale, just warm enough to touch your skin without burning. When I reached the stop, I sat down slowly, letting the weight of the gown settle around me. My phone buzzed once. I glanced down. It was a new post from Mom. The photo loaded quickly. Megan, smiling wide, stood next to a gleaming white Tesla parked in front of the house. Her dress matched the paint. The sun made the chrome look almost silver. The caption read, "She deserves the best. Thank you, Richard, for making this dream come true." I stared at it, then closed the screen. No mention of where I was headed or what I was wearing. No good luck or proud words. Just the car, the smile, and the girl who always had a way of getting what she wanted. When the bus pulled up, I climbed on without looking back. The driver nodded. I nodded in return and took a seat by the window. The bouquet sat on my lap. The ride into town was quiet. I watched the houses and trees pass by, familiar and unchanged. The auditorium was already busy when I arrived. Rows of families, clusters of friends holding signs and balloons. I walked past them alone. No one waved. No one called my name. When it was my turn, I walked across the stage without stopping. The diploma felt heavier than I expected, the paper thick and official. I held it in both hands. The applause was polite, distant. I didn't look for anyone in the crowd. After the ceremony, I didn't linger. I made my way back to the dorm, gathered the rest of my things, and packed them into the same old suitcase I'd brought with me freshman year. The sun was starting to dip when I closed the door behind me and headed toward the station. I was scheduled to fly out the next day, Austin full-time at Greenridge. A new apartment, a new job, a place where no one knew my last name. 3 weeks later, I was standing by the kitchen counter in that new apartment when my phone rang. The name on the screen made me stop. I let it ring once, twice. Then I picked up. "Hi, Mom." Her voice was softer than usual. "Caroline, what are you doing? Are you settled?" I leaned against the counter and waited. There was a pause. Then she said, "Your dad and I, well, we're looking into buying a little piece of land with someone from the clinic. We're short on the deposit. Would you be able to help out?" I let the silence stretch a little longer than usual. That conversation and what followed changed more than she could have guessed. I stayed quiet on the phone longer than I usually would. Mom's voice had softened after she asked, almost like she was waiting to hear which version of me would answer. The girl who always sent money without asking why, or the woman who'd just walked across a stage with no one in the crowd and knew exactly what that meant. I finally said, "You're calling to ask for money." She hesitated. "Well, it's not like that. It's just a small contribution. Your father and I thought since you're working now, I didn't say anything right away." I could feel the way her tone shifted just slightly sharper. "Caroline, what kind of response is that? We've done so much for you, and now that you've got a paycheck, you're too good for us." I leaned back against the wall, my phone still pressed to my ear. I spoke slow, careful. "You never asked if I was doing okay, or how the job is going. You called because you want help with a down payment. That's all." Her voice sharpened again. "I don't know what's gotten into you. Who raised you to speak this way? We put food on your plate, gave you a roof. Now you're looking down on your family." There was a pause. Then Dad's voice cut in louder, more certain. "That's enough. You're being disrespectful. If you think you're better than us now, then don't bother coming back. You've forgotten where you come from." I didn't raise my voice. I just said, "No." I remember always being the one who had to understand, the one who had to wait, the one who was told, "You're older, you can handle it." I'm not the one who forgot. Neither of them said anything for a moment. Then I hung up. I stood in the quiet of my kitchen phone still in my hand and let the silence settle around me. I didn't cry. I didn't feel angry. Just still. A kind of stillness that came from knowing something was finished. That night, I sat down at my desk and pulled out the invitation I'd received from Indiana University a few weeks earlier. They were starting a new speaker series focused on students who had faced emotional neglect or rejection during their college years and were now mentoring others. I'd left the email unanswered at the time. Now I opened my laptop and typed out my acceptance, pressed send, closed the screen. The next morning, I looked at my apartment differently. The kitchen with its creaky cabinet doors, the sun coming through the thin curtains, the stack of folders I'd brought home from work. I made coffee, took a walk down the street, and stopped by the bookstore on the corner. It was the kind of ordinary Saturday I used to dream about when I was a teenager, one where no one was waiting to hand me chores or reminding me I was second to someone else. The invitation had asked for a short summary of what I planned to share in the session. I kept it simple. I told the truth, that sometimes the people who are supposed to care for you just don't. That you can do everything right, work hard, get good grades, keep your head down, and still be invisible in your own home. And that walking away doesn't always mean you're angry. Sometimes it just means you're done being the only one holding on. A few days later, Leah called to check in. She'd moved to Seattle after graduation and was adjusting to her new design job. "How's Austin treating you?" she asked. I told her the apartment was small, but the job was steady. I told her I was speaking at the university next month. She let out a breath. "I hope you know how proud I am of you." "Really?" I didn't say anything for a second. Then I said, "Thanks." Jared sent me a photo later that week, the three of us standing outside the auditorium after the ceremony. Me in my gown holding the bouquet, Leah on one side, Jared on the other. All of us smiling. No family behind us, just friends who stayed. I printed it out and framed it, set it on the small bookshelf near the window. The next week I packed up and moved again. Not far, just a quieter neighborhood on the edge of the city, with a little more space and a balcony that looked out over a narrow stretch of trees. I didn't tell anyone back home. I didn't leave a forwarding address. I spent the weekend putting things away, organizing the kitchen, wiping down the cabinets. I strung up a few lights along the edge of the balcony. At night, they gave off a soft yellow glow, just enough to see by. I wasn't sure what would come next, but I wasn't afraid of the quiet anymore. And when the university sent the final itinerary for the guest speaker event, I opened it without hesitation. Because what I had to say was simple, and it was finally time to say it out loud. The university session was scheduled for a Thursday afternoon. I arrived early, took the elevator up to the second floor, and checked in at the registration table just outside the lecture hall. The coordinator handed me a small name badge and pointed me toward a seat near the front. The room was bright, not too big, maybe 50 chairs set in rows with soft lighting overhead. A screen was already lowered behind the podium, and someone was setting up the slides. I took a seat in the second row and pulled out my notes. I wasn't nervous exactly, but my hands were steady in the kind of way they only got when I'd gone over something again and again. I'd practiced what I was going to say in the mirror, in the car, in the quiet corner of my apartment. I didn't want it to sound rehearsed, just honest. The other speakers were already arriving, one young woman from Chicago who'd aged out of foster care, a man who'd grown up caring for a sick parent and dropped out twice before finishing his degree. Everyone had a story. That's what the program was called, The Stories That Got Us Here. At 2 o'clock, the room settled. The coordinator stood at the front and introduced the panel. When she read my name, I stood, walked to the podium, adjusted the mic just a little, and looked out over the small crowd. Faculty, a few students, a woman in the front row with a notepad, and a University of Indiana lanyard. I didn't have a slideshow. I didn't bring anything but my voice and a printed copy of my speech in case I lost my place. But once I started speaking, I didn't need the paper. I told them about the day I got my acceptance letter and the night I sat at the dinner table waiting to share it. I told them about Megan's 1,000,000 views, the garlic chicken, and the silence after I said I got in. I told them about the library job, the sandwich shop, the budgeting app, and the way my phone would light up with messages that never once asked if I'd eaten. I told them about my graduation, the invitation, the flowers I bought myself, the bus stop, the Tesla. I ended with the phone call, the one where they asked for money, the one where I finally said no. When I finished, no one clapped right away. There was just this quiet that settled over the room, not awkward, not heavy, just still. Then someone near the back stood and started to applaud. A few others followed. I didn't look at them for long. I just stepped down, took my seat, and let the next speaker go on. Afterward, people came up to say thank you. Some just nodded. One woman said her daughter was going through something similar. Another said she hadn't spoken to her own sister in 6 years. I listened. I didn't say much. There wasn't anything more I needed to add. Later that night, I walked home instead of taking the bus. The air was warm, the sidewalks busy with students and couples heading to dinner. I stopped by a small place near my apartment and picked up soup and bread, then carried it home in a paper bag. I ate at the kitchen table with the window open, the sounds of traffic humming in the distance. Before bed, I pulled out my phone and opened the photo of my graduation again. Me, Leah, and Jared arms around each other, all three of us smiling. I hadn't posted it before, not out of shame, just waiting. I opened the app, chose the photo, and added a short caption. No names, no story, just, sometimes walking alone is the first step toward home. I didn't wait to see who liked it. I put the phone down and got ready for bed. That small post, quiet and simple, turned out to be more of a shift than I expected. Because within a week, something else happened. Something I hadn't planned for. The post had been up for 6 days before anything happened. It hadn't gotten much attention, just a handful of quiet likes, mostly from people I knew through school or work. But late one evening, as I was sorting laundry and half listening to the news playing in the other room, my phone lit up again. The message came from a number I didn't recognize at first. It started with, "Hey, it's Leah." And for a second I thought maybe she was checking in again. But then the next line said, "You might want to sit down before you read this." She tagged me in a post on a university forum, one of those community pages where alumni shared stories, job updates, that sort of thing. I opened it not sure what to expect. It was a screenshot of my graduation post, the photo of me standing beside Leah and Jared with that one short caption underneath. But someone had added to it. They'd written a full paragraph about how students who put themselves through college without family support should be honored more. They mentioned the university should have called out names like mine during the ceremony, the ones who walked alone, unaided, without applause. Then came the comments. Dozens of them. Then hundreds. Some were from people I didn't know, students, recent grads, even faculty. Others were anonymous but heartfelt. Stories from people who had slept in cars, borrowed dress clothes, or walked to campus from a job across town because they couldn't afford the bus fare. They all said the same thing in different ways. This is what strength looks like. I read the comments in silence. Some made me pause. A few made me close the app just to catch my breath. The next morning, I got an email from the university's Student Affairs office. They were requesting permission to feature my story in a new mentorship program they were launching, one for first-generation students. The subject line just read, "Leadership through Resilience." I replied that afternoon. The same week, Greenridge asked if I'd be willing to speak on a panel for their fall internship kickoff. The recruiter had seen the university post. She said they were looking for someone who could talk about navigating the world of finance from the ground up, someone who didn't come from legacy connections or private networks. I said yes. That weekend, I walked down to the cafe a few blocks from my new place and sat on the patio with a notebook. I started jotting down what I might say at the Greenridge panel, bullet points at first, then small memories that had gotten lost in the shuffle. That first shift at the sandwich shop, my fingers cold from stocking soda bottles in the cooler, those late nights at the library sorting through textbooks other students had left behind. I wrote down the day I first picked up a budgeting book and realized I could make something of this, even if no one clapped at the finish line. By Monday, Greenridge had finalized the panel date. They asked if I could provide a short bio for the event program. I kept it simple. I wrote Caroline Mason, financial analyst, raised in Ohio, educated by effort. That last part I added without thinking, but it stayed. 2 days later, another email arrived, this one from a guidance counselor at my old high school. She said she'd seen the university's post through a professional network. She asked if I might be willing to speak to some of the senior girls. There was a handful, she said, who were quietly carrying more than anyone realized. At first, I wasn't sure I could. I hadn't been back to that town since graduation, but I told her I'd think about it. That night, I sat out on the balcony with a cup of tea, watching the evening traffic drift by under a darkening sky. I thought about how many times I'd told myself I wasn't seen, and now here I was with people asking me to speak, not for pity, not out of obligation, but because something in my story helped them feel less alone. I didn't reply to the counselor right away, but I kept the message. Something in me had shifted that week, not suddenly, not loudly, but enough to feel the difference. And the next few days brought something I didn't expect. Because out of all the people who could have reached out next, it wasn't a stranger. It was someone I hadn't heard from in over a year. The message came on a quiet Tuesday afternoon. I was between meetings reheating leftover soup in the break room when I saw the name on my phone screen. Megan. I hadn't heard from her since the morning of my graduation. The last words I remembered were, "You won't make it hard for me, right?" I didn't open the message right away. I finished lunch, checked my calendar, cleared a few emails. Then I finally sat down, took a breath, and tapped the screen. "Hey, saw your photo on the university site." Mom showed me. She didn't say it, but I think it made her cry. That was the first message. The second one came a minute later. "She misses you. Dad, too." I think they just didn't know how to say it. I stared at the screen. The words were careful, like someone trying to walk across thin ice without falling through. A few seconds passed, then another message came in. "They talk about you more than you think, especially since the car broke down. It's not the same without you here. I read that one twice." Then I set the phone down and walked over to the window. The street below was quiet, just a few cars passing and a delivery truck parked at the corner. I let the moment settle before picking the phone back up. I typed slowly. I needed to build something where I wasn't invisible. She replied right away. "I know." Another pause. "I didn't understand back then. I thought you were just being dramatic. But I've been thinking about a lot of things lately. There was no request for money, no apology either. Just that quiet stream of words like someone opening a door a few inches, just to see if the air had changed. Later that evening I got a call. This time it wasn't Megan. It was Mom. I let it ring once, twice. Then I answered. She didn't start with hello. She said, "Caroline, I saw your picture." Her voice was softer than I remembered. Slower. "You looked happy," she said. I waited. I didn't handle things right. I know that now. "Your dad. He has a hard time admitting things, but he knows it too." She didn't ask how I was. She didn't mention the graduation or the bus or the bouquet I'd carried alone. She just said, "I hope you're doing okay out there." I said I am. There was a pause. "We've been talking about coming to visit, maybe just for a day." I looked over at my kitchen table. A small vase sat there now, fresh flowers from the corner shop, something I bought for myself every other week. "I don't think I'm ready for that," I said. "But thank you for calling." She said she understood. We ended the call not with a goodbye, but with a quiet take care. I placed the phone face down and turned off the lamp. That night I slept with the window open. The sounds of the neighborhood drifted in muffled voices, the low hum of traffic, a dog barking somewhere in the distance. The next morning, I replied to the guidance counselor at my old high school. I told her I'd come, not for them, but for the ones like me. The high school looked smaller than I remembered. The parking lot had new stripes, the front hedges were trimmed back, and someone had repainted the main office door a lighter shade of blue. I stood near the front steps for a minute before going in, letting the stillness settle around me. Inside, the halls were quieter than I expected. Afternoon classes had just ended. A few students lingered near their lockers, laughing softly, their backpacks slung over one shoulder like it didn't weigh a thing. The guidance counselor met me near the library. She offered a warm smile, held out her hand, and said, "Thank you for coming, Caroline. I'm so glad you said yes." She led me to a small classroom with the lights turned low and a dozen folding chairs arranged in a circle. Most of the girls had already arrived, juniors and seniors, quiet, polite, curious. They sat up straighter when I walked in, unsure whether to expect a lecture or a story. I didn't bring a slideshow or notes. I just sat with them, feet flat on the floor, hands resting in my lap, and I began. I told them what it felt like to always be the one who understood, the one who got asked to help, to wait, to do more with less. I told them how hard it was to walk across a stage when the seats behind you stayed empty, and how sometimes the silence from your own family can echo louder than applause from strangers. But I also told them what came after. I spoke about building a life from the ground up, one piece at a time, about friends who became family, and the kind of quiet strength that grows when no one is watching. I didn't give advice. I just shared what was true. Afterward, a few girls stayed behind. One of them, maybe 17, said I thought I was the only one who felt like this. I just nodded and said, "You're not." That night, back in my apartment, I opened the drawer beside my bed and took out the photo from graduation, the same one I'd carried with me from one move to the next. It still made me pause. 3 people standing in the sunlight, smiling for no one but each other. I placed it on the windowsill this time, where the evening light could catch it. Sometimes I think about that morning at the bus stop, how I sat alone in a pressed gown, holding flowers I bought myself, hoping for something different. And I wish I could go back, not to change anything, but just to sit beside that version of me and say, "You're closer than you think." Because walking alone wasn't the end of anything. It was the beginning of everything. If you've ever carried yourself through a moment no one else saw, I hope you know it mattered. If you're still waiting for someone to cheer you on, I hope you find the courage to clap for yourself. And if this story spoke to something in you, feel free to leave a comment or just take a quiet breath and know you're not alone. Thanks for spending this time with me.